It was a regular Tuesday evening, but for Mark it felt like the world was closing in. The small apartment he and his son Luke shared was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Luke playing with his toy cars in the living room. It was supposed to be a special night, one of those rare moments when Mark promised to take Luke to Taco Bell, their favorite place for a quick dinner. But now, as Mark stared at the numbers on his phone, the weight of his financial reality hit him like a ton of bricks. Mark opened his bank app again, hoping the numbers would magically change, but they didn't. His heart sank as he realized he didn't have enough money to pay for even a small meal at Taco Bell. Not this time. "Dad, are we going to Taco Bell tonight?" Luke called out from the living room, his voice full of innocent excitement. Mark swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. Buddy, I don't think we can go tonight after all," he said, walking into the living room with a forced smile. Luke was holding a toy car in his hand, the bright blue plastic gleaming under the dim light. "Why not?" Luke asked, furrowing his brows. He had been talking about this meal all week. He'd even saved up his allowance to buy an extra taco or two. The disappointment in his eyes was too much for Mark to bear. "Things are a little tight right now, buddy," Mark explained, kneeling down to Luke's level. "Maybe next time, okay?" Luke's face fell, and Mark could see the confusion written across his small features. He didn't understand, and how could he? To Luke, Taco Bell was a treat, not a luxury. It was something simple, a shared moment of happiness between father and son. But for Mark, it was more than just a meal. It was a symbol of his failure to provide. Mark tried to mask his disappointment, but the truth was he felt defeated. How could he tell his son that sometimes life just didn't go the way you wanted it to? How could he explain that sometimes even the simplest pleasures were out of reach? "Hey, how about we make our own tacos tonight?" Mark suggested with a weak grin. "We can have a taco-making contest right here at home. I'll even let you win." Luke didn't seem convinced, but he smiled a little, clearly trying to cheer his dad up. "Okay, Dad, you're the best." But as Mark walked back into the kitchen, his mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was letting his son down. How many times had he promised Luke things he just couldn't deliver? How many times had he made excuses, hoping the weight of their struggles wouldn't be so apparent to his son? His thoughts were interrupted by a loud honk from behind. Mark's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, and for a split second, he felt a pang of panic. Had he done something wrong? Was someone impatient behind him in the drive-thru? But no, it wasn't a mistake. Mark had been waiting in line at the Taco Bell drive-thru, hoping for some kind of miracle. But it wasn't going to happen. He had no way of paying for the food, and the car behind him had started honking again. "Dad?" Luke asked from the back seat, sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" Mark sighed, staring at the window in front of him, feeling helpless. His son's voice was small, almost too small for the weight of the situation. "What do I do now?" That was when it happened. A voice from the car behind him cut through the tension. "Hey, buddy, everything okay?" The voice sounded familiar. Mark turned to look, not quite believing his eyes. It couldn't be. Standing by the window was Keanu Reeves, yes, Keanu Reeves, the famous actor. Known not just for his movies, but for his kind heart and humility. Mark blinked, unsure if he was imagining things. This had to be some kind of joke, right? But there he was, standing by the window, watching Mark with a concerned look on his face. "Everything okay?" Keanu asked again, a friendly smile on his face. Mark's brain was racing. He hadn't seen Keanu Reeves in person before, let alone in the Taco Bell drive-thru. But there was something in Keanu's eyes, something warm and genuine that made Mark feel a little less alone in that moment. Yeah, Mark stammered, still processing the surrealness of the situation. "It's just, we can't really afford this meal tonight." Keanu's smile didn't fade. "I know what it's like," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Let me help you out." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Keanu Reeves, the actor, the icon, was offering to pay for his meal. "Really?" Mark asked, his voice cracking a little. "You don't have to do that." Keanu just shrugged. "I want to. Trust me, I've been there." Before Mark could say anything else, Keanu turned to the window and paid for the meal, telling the Taco Bell employee, "Put it all on my tab." Mark was left, standing there, stunned, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Keanu leaned back against the car, grinning. "You and your son enjoy your meal. No one should go hungry because of a few bad days." Mark, still in disbelief, could only manage a quiet, "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Keanu walked back to his car, Mark felt a rush of gratitude, but he also felt something else, hope. In a world that often felt cold and indifferent, here was a stranger, a celebrity no less, who had reached out with a simple act of kindness. He could hardly believe it, but there was something about Keanu's gesture that stayed with Mark long after that night, something that made him think, maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The next morning, Mark woke up feeling a little lighter. The events of the previous night played over in his mind like a dream, the surreal kindness from Keanu Reeves still, leaving him speechless. But the weight of reality soon set back in as he walked into the small kitchen, where Luke was already sitting at the table, eating cereal with a spoon that seemed to be more interested in the milk than the food. "Hey, buddy," Mark said as he tried to shake off the lingering shock. "How was your sleep?" "It was good, Dad," Luke replied between spoonfuls, his eyes wide and curious. "Do you think we can get Taco Bell again sometime soon?" Mark felt his heart sink at the question. He had promised Luke a treat, an escape from the stress and disappointment they both had to face every day. But now he was back to square one, dealing with his bank balance and the hard truth that getting fast food was still a luxury for them. "Yeah. Soon, I promise," Mark said, forcing a smile. He knew he had to make it up to Luke, but how? The truth was he was barely scraping by. The bills were piling up, and he'd been working overtime at the local mechanic shop just to keep things afloat. Mark hated feeling like he couldn't give his son the simple things in life. That's when he heard Luke ask, "Dad, why do we always have to eat at home? Everyone else gets to go to restaurants." Mark paused, trying to find the right words. It wasn't that he didn't want to take Luke out. He just couldn't. Not with how little they had. He wanted to shield his son from the truth, from the real struggle that he faced every single day. "Not everyone can afford to eat out all the time, buddy," Mark said, taking a seat across from Luke. He ruffled his hair and added, "But that's okay, we've got each other, and that's more than enough." Luke nodded, but Mark could see the disappointment in his eyes, the kind of disappointment he couldn't hide. As Mark glanced out the window, his thoughts began to spiral. He hated that he couldn't give Luke a normal life. He wanted to provide the kind of stability and comfort that every child deserved, but it wasn't happening. Not today, not tomorrow, not anytime soon. Mark's phone buzzed, breaking him from his thoughts. It was a text from Tanya, his ex-wife. They had been co-parenting amicably for the past couple of years, but the stress was beginning to take its toll on their relationship. Tanya: "Hey Mark, I need to talk to you about Luke's upcoming school trip. He needs $100 by the end of the year." Weak. Mark's stomach dropped. Another expense. How was he going to manage? His head began to swim with numbers and bills, each more daunting than the last. He stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. They'd been through this dance before, splitting responsibilities, figuring out who would pay for what, constantly juggling just to keep their heads above water. He typed a response quickly, his fingers tapping nervously on the screen. Mark: "I'm doing my best, Tanya. I just don't know how I can swing that right now. I've got a lot on my plate." He hit send before he could think twice. The last thing he wanted was for Tanya to get upset, but the reality was staring him in the face. He was running on fumes, and the pressure was starting to crack him. "Tanya, I understand, but we need to figure something out. You're his father too, don't make me do this alone." Mark sighed, setting the phone down on the table. Luke was quietly eating his cereal, completely unaware of the stress mounting around him. Mark didn't want to burden him with adult worries, but it felt impossible not to. The weight of it all felt suffocating. How could he make this work? How could he take care of Luke, provide for him, and still hold on to some semblance of dignity? Then suddenly Mark remembered Keanu, the unexpected kindness from the night before. Mark had tried to brush it off as a fluke, a one-time thing. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much it had meant. Keanu had recognized something in him, something he couldn't even explain. Maybe Keanu was more than just an actor. Maybe, in that moment, he had seen Mark's struggle and reached out as a reminder that there was still kindness in the world. That thought sparked something in Mark, a small flicker of hope. What if there was something he could do? What if the kindness Keanu had shown was a sign that he wasn't entirely alone? He wasn't sure what exactly it meant, but he had a feeling that Keanu's kindness wasn't a one-off gesture. He didn't know how or why, but there had to be more to it than just paying for a meal. Mark's mind was racing. He didn't know if this would go anywhere, but for the first time in a long time he felt a little spark of possibility. He pulled out his phone again, his fingers hesitating over the screen. What if he reached out to Keanu? He couldn't expect another handout, but maybe, just maybe, Keanu could offer some advice. Maybe even lend a hand in a way that didn't involve charity. Mark wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. He wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Hey, Luke," he said, standing up from the table. "How about we go for a walk today? Get some fresh air?" Luke looked up with a grin. "Yeah, let's go, Dad." Mark smiled back, feeling that familiar warmth in his chest. It wasn't Taco Bell, and it wasn't a new bike or fancy toys, but it was something. It was a small moment of joy, and sometimes that was enough. As they walked out the door, Mark couldn't help but wonder what kind of help Keanu could really offer. Would it just be a fleeting moment of kindness, or was there something more in store? The days ahead seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear. Mark was ready to take a step forward. The day passed quickly, and before Mark knew it, the sun was beginning to set. He and Luke had spent most of the afternoon at the nearby park, kicking a soccer ball around and laughing. It was one of those rare moments when they could just be happy, no worries, no stress, just the two of them. As they made their way home, Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of his thoughts slowly returning. The $100 for the school trip, the unanswered questions, and the nagging feeling that he was constantly falling short. Even though he was doing his best, it never seemed to be enough. They reached the small, worn-out apartment building where they lived, and Mark opened the door, the familiar smell of home greeting them. He sighed, relieved to be back, but still uneasy about the long list of things that needed to be taken care of. Luke dropped his backpack on the couch, his energy still high from the afternoon. "Dad, can we go for another walk tomorrow?" Mark smiled softly. "We'll see, buddy, but first let's get some dinner, okay?" Luke nodded eagerly. "Maybe we can go to Taco Bell this time." Mark felt the familiar pang in his chest as he walked into the kitchen. The hope in Luke's eyes was enough to make anyone's heart break, especially his. He didn't want to disappoint his son again. He opened the cupboard, eyes scanning the few cans of beans and rice they had left. It would have to do. They would have a simple dinner tonight, and that was fine. But just as he was about to open a can of beans, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Tanya again. "Tanya. Mark, I really need you to figure something out for the trip. The deadline is coming up." Mark frowned, frustration building. He had no idea how he was going to manage. But then, just as he was about to reply, another unexpected buzz came through. This time it was a notification from his email. "Keanu Reeves donates to local charity event. Surprise appearance scheduled." Mark paused, blinking at the screen. It seemed like a random news update, but something about it caught his attention. There was a picture of Keanu, his warm, recognizable smile lighting up the photo. Beneath the headline, it mentioned that Keanu was not just attending an event. He was actively involved in raising funds for various community programs, including those that supported struggling families. The coincidence was uncanny. Was this the same Keanu who had helped him out at Taco Bell? The man who had changed everything, if only for a few minutes? Mark had been thinking about reaching out to him, but hadn't been sure how. What would he say? How could he ask for help without feeling like a charity case? But now, with this email, the connection felt undeniable. Luke bounded into the room, holding his toy car once again, his face lighting up with excitement. "Dad, I just got an idea. How about we try making our own tacos like we talked about before? We can make a whole taco restaurant in our living room." Mark chuckled at his son's enthusiasm. "You know what, Luke? That sounds like the best idea I've heard all day. For a few moments, Mark put aside his worries. They gathered the ingredients they had, making makeshift tacos in their small kitchen, laughing together as they added too much salsa or stuffed their tacos to the breaking point. Luke was thrilled. For him, it didn't matter where the tacos came from. It was the moment, the shared experience with his dad. But as the night went on, Mark couldn't shake the thought of the email. Keanu had been so kind, so genuine. Maybe this was a sign. Maybe he could reach out, not for a handout, but for advice, a conversation, a way to find a path forward, a direction that wasn't just about survival, but about building something better for himself and Luke. Mark knew he had to make a decision. Would he take the leap and reach out to Keanu? Or would he continue struggling on his own, hiding his difficulties from everyone, even from his son? He glanced at Luke, who was now finishing his taco with a satisfied grin on his face. Mark felt a rush of love and guilt. He wanted so badly to give Luke more than just a few simple tacos. He wanted to give him a future, security, and happiness. But for now, this was what he could offer, this love, this bond. And he knew it had to be enough. That evening, Mark sat down at the small desk in the corner of the living room, pulling up the email again. He stared at it for a long time, his mind racing. What could he say? After a few minutes of thinking, he finally typed a message. Subject, a quick question if you don't mind. Hi Keanu, I hope this message finds you well. I'm not sure if you remember me, but I was the guy in the Taco Bell drive-thru the other night. I'm the father of the little boy, Luke, who you so kindly helped with a meal. I just wanted to say again how much your generosity meant to me. It was more than just paying for a meal. It was a reminder that there is kindness in this world when things feel tough. I'm reaching out because I'm facing some challenges right now, and honestly could use some advice. It's hard to find the right path forward, and I'm just wondering if you have any wisdom you could share. I know it might sound strange to ask, but I thought if anyone would understand, it would be you. Thank you again for your kindness. It's made a bigger impact than you can imagine. Best. Mark hesitated before clicking send. The idea of reaching out to a celebrity, especially someone as well known as Keanu, felt strange. But what did he have to lose? He took a deep breath and hit send. Then he stood up and walked over to Luke, who was already curled up on the couch watching TV. Hey Luke, Mark said softly, sitting next to him. How about we try to get some sleep? Tomorrow's a new day, right? Luke nodded, his small face lighting up. Tomorrow we'll make the best tacos ever, right, Dad? Mark smiled, his heart swelling with love. Right, buddy. Tomorrow, we'll make the best tacos ever. As they both drifted off to sleep, Mark couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope, as though something big was about to change. Something unexpected. And maybe, just maybe, it would all begin with the simplest of acts, just like that night at Taco Bell. Little did he know, Keanu's next response would take their lives in an entirely new direction. The following days felt like a blur. Mark had sent the email to Keanu Reeves, not expecting much in return, but hoping for a little guidance. The email had been a shot in the dark, a small attempt to reach out to someone who had shown him kindness when he had none to spare. But as the days passed, his hope dwindled, and he tried to push the idea from his mind. There were bills to pay, a child to raise, and the same cycle of uncertainty that marked every day. But then, on the fourth day after sending the email, Mark's phone buzzed early in the morning. It was an email notification. Keanu Reeves. Subject, Re. A quick question. If you don't mind, Mark's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message for a moment, unsure if he was dreaming. Could it really be? Could Keanu actually have responded? He opened the email. Hey Mark, I remember you and Luke. It was a brief moment, but I'll never forget it. I'm glad I could help out. As for your email, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I'm the right person to offer advice, but if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's that life has a funny way of surprising us. Sometimes when things are toughest, that's when opportunities can emerge out of nowhere. You've got something really important right in front of you. Luke. Everything else, all the struggle, is part of the journey. But the love and bond you share with your son, that's the real treasure. If you're looking for advice, I'd say this. Keep looking for the small things in life that bring you joy, and trust yourself. You'll get there even if it's one step at a time. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here. Take care. Keanu. Mark stared at the screen, dumbfounded. It was brief, but in it, Keanu had given him something far more valuable than advice. Hope. Hope that things could change. Hope that he wasn't alone in this. Hope that there was still a way forward, even in the hardest of times. Mark couldn't believe it. A simple message, but it felt like a lifeline thrown his way. It was everything he needed to hear, and it came from someone who didn't owe him anything, someone who had already done more than he could ever repay. But now Keanu was offering more. Understanding. Mark quickly showed the email to Luke, who was still in bed rubbing his eyes. "Dad, who's that?" Luke asked, looking at the phone curiously. "That's someone special," Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. "He's the reason we were able to have Taco Bell the other night." Luke blinked, trying to process the connection. "Wait, you mean the guy who helped us?" Mark nodded. "Yes, buddy, the same guy." Luke grinned, clearly excited. "So, what did he say?" Mark took a deep breath and read the email aloud to Luke, who listened intently. As he finished, Luke gave a little cheer. "See, Dad? He said we'll get there. That means we'll be okay." Mark laughed, a lightness settling in his chest. "Yeah, buddy, he's right. We'll get there." But even as Mark took comfort in Keanu's words, there was still the nagging issue of their financial troubles, the $100 for the school trip, and the growing pile of bills that threatened to overtake him at every turn. It was then that a thought struck Mark. What if Keanu really was offering more than just words? What if the kindness he'd shown wasn't just a fleeting gesture? Mark knew he couldn't rely on Keanu to fix everything for him, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way for him to use the connection he had made to improve his situation. Mark didn't want to take advantage of Keanu's generosity, but the idea was tempting. He had nothing to lose at this point, did he? A few days later, after much hesitation, Mark found himself typing out another email to Keanu. Subject: just one more question. "Hi, Keanu. Thank you so much for your thoughtful words. They really meant a lot, especially right now. You've reminded me of something important, how much I have in front of me, even if things seem tough. There's something else I wanted to ask. I'm not sure if it's appropriate, but I'm in a bit of a bind. I'm struggling to make ends meet for Luke's school trip, and I hate that I'm even asking this, but if there's any way you could help, I'd be incredibly grateful. I understand if this is too much and I don't want to impose, but if you're able to help in any way, I'd appreciate it more than words can say. Thank you again." Mark stared at the message for a long time before hitting send. He felt the weight of the request pressing down on him, but this time it felt different. He wasn't asking for a handout. He was simply asking for help when he didn't know where else to turn. A couple of days passed before he heard back from Keanu. This time the email came through later in the evening, just after dinner. "Hey Mark, I understand how tough things can get, and I admire your honesty. The thing about life is that we all go through periods where we need a little extra help, and there's no shame in reaching out for it when you need it. I'm happy to help with Luke's school trip. You're doing your best, and that's what matters. Take care." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Keanu was actually helping. He had responded with kindness, offering to pay for Luke's trip without hesitation. Tears welled up in Mark's eyes as he showed the email to Luke, who was bouncing around with excitement when he read it. "Dad, we're going to the trip, we're going to the trip," Luke cheered, hugging Mark tightly. Mark felt a wave of relief and gratitude wash over him. He couldn't believe it. Not just because Keanu was helping, but because this moment felt like a turning point. It felt like things were beginning to shift in ways he couldn't yet understand. And for the first time in a long time, Mark felt hopeful. The next morning he sent a quick thank you message to Keanu, knowing that their paths had crossed for a reason. Subject: "Thank you, Keanu. I can't thank you enough for your generosity. You've made a huge difference for Luke. And me. I'm still in shock, honestly, but also deeply grateful. You didn't just help us with a trip, you gave us a little piece of hope. We'll never forget this. All the best, Mark." Mark looked at Luke, who was already planning what he would pack for the school trip. Mark couldn't help but smile, knowing that their journey wasn't over yet. But in that moment, everything felt just a little brighter, and perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of something new for both of them. The days leading up to Luke's school trip were filled with excitement. Mark could barely keep up with Luke's enthusiasm as his son packed and repacked his little backpack, making sure he had everything he needed. He was giddy with anticipation, his energy infectious. Mark, on the other hand, felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Keanu's kindness had given him a gift, one he would never forget, but it also opened up something inside of him, a feeling of vulnerability and gratitude that was hard to reconcile with his pride. Though Luke's trip was covered, there was still a lingering sense of uncertainty in Mark's mind. The bills piled up, the future still seemed uncertain, and the cycle of struggle felt like it would never end. He had to do something more. He couldn't keep relying on others, no matter how generous they were. But despite his worries, Mark kept his focus on Luke, who was just so happy. He was growing, thriving, and this trip was going to be something he would remember forever. Mark couldn't help but think about what it meant for Luke to experience something like this, especially after everything they'd been through. The night before Luke left for the trip, Mark found himself sitting at their small kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hand, deep in thought. He had to take charge. He had to make sure they were ready for whatever came next. It was time to change things for real. "Dad, I'm all ready," Luke shouted, rushing into the kitchen wearing his favorite baseball cap, his face lit up with excitement. He was practically bouncing on his feet. Mark smiled at the sight. "You? Sure are, champ, you're going to have a great time." Luke tugged at his shirt, making Mark laugh. "I can't wait to see all the cool stuff, Dad. Do you think they'll let me pet a goat? I've always wanted to do that." Mark chuckled, his heart swelling with affection. "Maybe. You never know what adventures await on field trips." Luke hugged his dad tightly before running off to finish the last of his packing. Mark stood up slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He looked around their small apartment, taking in the worn furniture, the old pictures on the wall, the half-empty fridge. They had so little, yet they had so much more than some people. He thought back to that day at Taco Bell when Keanu had shown up out of nowhere, offering not just money but genuine kindness. It had been a turning point, but Mark knew the real journey was just beginning. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control of his life and creating a future for Luke that was full of possibilities. The next morning, Mark drove Luke to the school for his trip, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He was thrilled for Luke, but the thought of him being away for the day left a hole in Mark's chest. How would he spend his time? As he watched Luke join the group of excited kids, Mark felt a pang of loneliness. He wished he could be part of that world, the carefree world of children, where everything was simple and full of wonder. But he couldn't afford that. There was too much on the line. Once Luke's bus pulled away, Mark took a deep breath, standing, alone in the parking lot. He felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. How was he going to make this all work? He knew it was time to do something. Mark spent the next few hours walking around town, trying to clear his mind. He went by the grocery store, and then by the local library where he used to spend time when things were less chaotic. It was in the quiet corners of the library that Mark had his moment of clarity. He wandered through the aisles, searching for something to distract him, when he saw a bulletin board in the corner. Among the various flyers for classes and job opportunities was one that caught his eye. Small Business Workshop. Learn how to start your own business. His heart skipped a beat. Could this be the answer? It was only a few hours a week, but the idea of learning how to create something for himself, something that wasn't dependent on the uncertainty of his current job, was exactly what he needed. Maybe he couldn't afford a lot, but he could afford to invest in himself. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed a pen and wrote down the details for the class. The class was held in the evenings, and Mark was surprised at how much he enjoyed it. The people in the group weren't much different from him. They were all looking for something, whether it was a way to start over or a chance to pursue a passion they'd long put aside. The instructor was a no-nonsense woman named Ellen, who had successfully started her own small business years ago. She had a sharp wit, but she also had a kind heart. Mark found himself absorbing everything she taught. It wasn't an easy road, but the more he learned, the more confident he became. He started developing a plan, a small catering business that could eventually turn into a food truck. It was simple, but it was a start. He could cook. He could create. A week later, Mark received a call from Tanya, the school's principal. The last time they'd spoken, she'd been firm about the trip deadline, but this time she had a different tone in her voice. "Mark, I just wanted to check in on you," Tanya said. "Luke's trip went really well. He was so well behaved, and I heard he had a blast. I also wanted to thank you again for all your hard work. You've really done a great job as a dad." Mark was taken aback. He hadn't heard Tanya speak like this before. "Thanks, Tanya. I just try to do my best." "Well, your best is paying off, and I wanted to let you know. We're going to be starting a new program in the community. It's about helping local families with entrepreneurship. I thought of you when I saw your name on the list. Would you be interested in joining?" Mark's heart skipped a beat. The community had always felt so distant, but now it was reaching out to him. "Absolutely," Mark said, barely able to believe his ears. "I'd love to be a part of that." Mark hung up the phone, a grin spreading across his face. He had no idea how things were going to play out, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the first step toward a new beginning. It wasn't just about the small catering business or the chance to finally pay his bills. It was about growth, change, and taking charge of his future in a way he never thought possible. That evening, Mark picked up Luke from school, eager to tell him about the new opportunity. Luke bounded toward the car, his energy still high from the trip. "How was the field trip, buddy?" Mark asked, smiling as Luke climbed into the car. "It was awesome, Dad. I learned so much, and I got to pet a goat," Luke said, his face alight with excitement. Mark laughed, feeling a warmth spread through him. "That's amazing, Luke. You know what? I've got some exciting news, too. I've started a new adventure of my own." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Really? What's that, Dad?" "I'm going to learn how to start my own business. A small one, but it's going to be ours. Something we can build together." Luke's eyes widened, his face lighting up. "That's so cool. Does that mean we can make our own tacos, like for everyone?" Mark grinned. "Exactly, buddy. It's just the beginning. But together we're going to make something special." As they drove home, Mark realized that this was the first day of the rest of their lives. A day filled with possibilities. A day that had started with a simple act of kindness and had turned into something he could never have imagined. The journey was just beginning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of excitement and hard work. Mark felt energized in a way he hadn't in years, diving into his business plans with a fervor that surprised even him. Every evening, after Luke was settled, for the night, Mark would pore over his notes, research suppliers, and refine his catering idea. It wasn't much yet, just a collection of hopeful ideas, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, Mark had hope. Luke had his own role in the process. Every time Mark worked on his plans, Luke would sit at the kitchen table beside him, drawing pictures of what their food truck might look like or brainstorming names for the business. Mark could feel his son's excitement as if it were contagious, and it made the effort feel worthwhile. One evening, as Mark was sitting at the table looking at a rough estimate for startup costs, Luke walked in with a drawing in hand. His grin stretched across his face and his eyes were wide with excitement. "Dad, I made something special for our food truck," Luke announced, holding up a colorful drawing. Mark smiled warmly and leaned forward, glancing at the paper. The drawing was simple, bright, bold colors and a cute taco truck with a happy taco mascot waving from the window. "What do you think?" Luke asked, his voice full of pride. "I think it's perfect, buddy," Mark said, his heart swelling. "That's exactly what we need, a taco truck with personality." "Yeah," Luke beamed. "And look, there's you behind the counter and me helping out." Mark chuckled, feeling a wave of gratitude for his son's optimism. "I think we're going to make this work, Luke. I really do." As Mark continued to fine-tune his plans, the community program Tanya had mentioned took off. Mark attended weekly workshops, learning everything from budgeting to marketing. He was amazed at how much he was picking up, and it helped him feel less intimidated by the idea of starting his own business. Tanya had been right. He wasn't alone in this. There were other people just like him, each with their own dreams, and they were all striving to create something better for their families. One of the workshops was focused on creating a strong brand, and that's when Mark realized he needed to connect with the community in a way that went beyond just selling food. He wanted to build something that reflected his journey, something that people could connect with, not just as customers, but as supporters. After weeks of hard work and brainstorming, Mark decided on a name for the business: Luke's Taco Dream. It felt perfect. It was personal. It was theirs. A month into the program, Mark received another surprise. As part of the community support initiative, local business owners were invited to submit proposals for a small grant to help with startup costs. The thought of applying for a grant had always seemed too intimidating to Mark, but now with the encouragement of the program, he felt ready. He spent the next few days drafting his application, pouring his heart into every word, explaining not just the business but the story behind it. A father and son trying to build a future together from scratch. When Mark clicked submit on the application, his hands were shaking. He didn't expect to win, he was just happy to have taken the step. It felt like progress. Several weeks passed and life had started to settle into a new rhythm. Luke's school trip was a distant memory, but it had opened a new chapter for both of them. They had taken a leap of faith, and now the idea of creating something of their own felt more possible than ever. One day, as Mark was cleaning up after dinner, he noticed an envelope on the counter, an envelope with the logo of the community program stamped on it. His stomach dropped. It was the grant response. Mark hesitated for a moment before opening it, his heart racing in anticipation. When he unfolded the letter, he found that his hands were trembling. "Dear Mark, congratulations. We are pleased to inform you that your application for the small business grant has been selected. Your proposal for Luke's Taco Dream stood out to us because of the heart and passion behind it. We believe that your business will be a valuable addition to our community, and we are excited to see where this journey takes you. Enclosed is a check for $5,000 to help get you started. We are also offering you a mentorship program to help guide you as you launch your business. We wish you the best of luck and look forward to seeing your dream come to life. Sincerely, the Small Business Initiative." Team Mark's heart soared as he read the letter a second time. He had done it. They had done it. He had won the grant. The next few days were a whirlwind. Mark deposited the check, met with his assigned mentor, and began taking the first real steps toward turning his dream into a reality. With the grant, he was able to purchase the supplies he needed, secure a small kitchen space for preparing food, and get the ball rolling on the permits and licenses necessary to start his taco business. It wasn't easy. There were still countless obstacles, from health department regulations to managing his finances. But for the first time in months, Mark didn't feel alone. The support from the community and the momentum from his workshops helped him stay grounded. And of course, Luke was there every step of the way, helping pick out napkin designs and even coming up with a catchy slogan, "Tacos with a Heart." Mark loved the slogan. It was simple, but it represented everything he wanted the business to be: authentic, full of love and personal. As the weeks went by, Mark continued to refine the details, and soon the big day came, the day he would finally open the doors to Luke's Taco Dream. The opening was a small event, but it was everything to Mark. He had invited the people who had helped him along the way, from Tanya at the school to his new friends from the business workshops. And of course, Luke was there, bouncing around with excitement, ready to help in any way he could. When Mark finally opened the taco truck's window to the first customers, his heart swelled with pride. The smell of freshly cooked tacos filled the air, and the sound of happy customers made it all feel real. He glanced down at Luke, who was beaming from ear to ear. "We did it, buddy," Mark said, his voice thick with emotion. "We sure did." "Dad," Luke replied, his eyes shining. Mark couldn't help but think of that moment when they had been struggling in the parking lot of Taco Bell, feeling like they had nothing left. Now they had a future. Not just any future, but one that was built on love, resilience, and the belief that things could get better, no matter how impossible it seemed. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the taco truck, Mark took a deep breath and smiled. This was just the beginning. The days following the opening of Luke's Taco Dream were a blur of hard work, joy, and unexpected challenges. Mark had no idea just how much energy it would take to run a small food business, but every day he felt the weight of it and the thrill that came with it. The taco truck became their pride and joy. It was a symbol of how far they had come, and every customer who stopped by felt like a victory. Mark had learned quickly that a food truck wasn't just about cooking. There were supplies to manage, paperwork to file, and endless little tasks that piled up in the day-to-day operation. But despite the hard work, he was fueled by a deeper motivation. Luke. This wasn't just a business to him anymore. It was about giving his son the future he deserved. Luke was always by his side, helping with the small things. He would pack up napkins and condiments, greet customers with an innocent enthusiasm that was contagious, and most importantly, never stopped reminding Mark why they were doing this. "Remember, Dad, this is all for our dream," he'd say, his bright eyes filled with the unshakable faith of a child. Mark would smile and nod, trying to keep the weight of the world off his shoulders, but the truth was, things were getting tougher. Though the customers were steadily rolling in, there were still moments of uncertainty. The truck wasn't getting as much foot traffic as Mark had hoped, and there were days when he'd barely break even. Every dollar spent on ingredients and supplies felt like a gamble. On those quiet nights when Luke had gone to bed and the truck was parked for the evening, Mark would sit alone, staring at the numbers on his tablet, hoping for a breakthrough. One evening after closing up, Mark received a call that would change everything. The phone rang late, almost 10 p.m. Mark had just finished cleaning the grill and was exhausted, rubbing his eyes as he glanced at the caller ID. It was Tanya. "Mark, I'm sorry to call so late," she said, her voice excited. "I have some news that might be just what you need." Mark straightened up, suddenly alert. "What's going on?" "I was talking to a few people in the area, and there's a local food festival coming up next weekend. It's a pretty big event, and they're still looking for food vendors. I thought this could be a great opportunity for you and Luke's Taco Dream. You could get a lot of exposure, and it could really help you build your customer base." Mark's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly what he needed. He had been too hesitant to put himself out there, too scared of failure, too tired to push for more. But now here was an opportunity staring him in the face. He could almost see it. A crowd of people lined up to try his tacos, excited to taste something fresh and new. "I don't know." Mark hesitated, the stress of his financial situation creeping in. "It sounds great, but it's a big investment. I'd need to buy more ingredients, pay the entry fee. I'm not sure I can swing it." "I understand," Tanya said, her voice softening. "But here's the thing, this could be a turning point. If you don't try, you'll never know what could have been. And I believe in you, Mark. I think you can do it." Mark thought for a long moment. Tanya's words rang in his ears. She was right. He had to take the risk. "Okay," he said finally, his voice firm. "I'll do it." Over the next week, Mark worked tirelessly to prepare for the festival. He and Luke spent hours getting everything ready, packing the truck with extra supplies, tweaking the menu and making sure their branding was on point. Mark even had a few sleepless nights, fine-tuning recipes and making sure everything was perfect. Luke was beside him every step of the way, offering his own ideas and energy. "Dad, do you think we should add some jalapenos to the tacos? Or maybe we should do a salsa bar with different toppings?" Luke's suggestions were a little over the top at times, but Mark loved his enthusiasm. The idea of a salsa bar seemed like a hit, so they made it work. When the day of the food festival finally arrived, Mark was a bundle of nerves. This was the moment of truth. Could he do it? Could they do it? As they set up their booth in the crowded parking lot with dozens of other vendors, Mark's stomach churned. He looked around at the competition, at the established businesses with their flashy banners and smooth operations. He felt out of place, like a fish swimming upstream. But then something amazing happened. People started noticing the bright, cheerful taco truck with the colorful sign that read, "Luke's Taco Dream." It wasn't long before the first customers approached, and with each one, Mark's anxiety began to ease. They loved the tacos. They loved the unique flavors, They loved the vibe that Mark and Luke had cultivated. By the end of the day, Mark had made more money than he had in the entire month of opening the truck. The festival had been a success, not just financially but emotionally. Mark had proven to himself that he could make this work, and with the help of the community, he was building something real. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the crowd began to thin out, Mark and Luke shared a quiet moment by the truck. They were exhausted, covered in taco sauce and flour, but their smiles were wide. "We did it, Dad," Luke said, his voice filled with awe. "We really did it." Mark knelt down to look his son in the eyes, pride swelling in his chest. "Yeah, we did. And this is just the beginning." As they packed up, Mark couldn't help but feel like something had shifted inside of him. For the first time, he wasn't just struggling to survive, he was building something. Something that would last, something that mattered. The success of the festival didn't just bring in new customers, it brought new opportunities. In the weeks that followed, Mark received several calls from local businesses wanting to collaborate, asking if he would bring his tacos to their events or cater their offices. Word of mouth spread, and soon Luke's taco dream was becoming a name people knew. For Mark, the path ahead was still uncertain, but it was full of hope. He had learned something important. You can't wait for things to happen. Sometimes you have to make your own luck. And with his son by his side, there was no dream too big. The future was starting to look brighter than ever. The weeks after the food festival passed in a whirlwind of busy days and sleepless nights. Luke's taco dream was steadily growing, and Mark found himself overwhelmed in the best possible way. The orders came in, the customers returned, and new business opportunities began to pop up, one after another. It was a dream come true for both Mark and Luke. But the truth was, Mark was starting to feel the strain. He was still handling most of the work on his own, cooking, managing the finances, and keeping track of inventory, and it was wearing him down. There were moments when he felt like he was barely keeping his head above water. The tacos were selling, the business was thriving, but Mark was physically and mentally exhausted. Luke, ever the bright light in his life, was trying his best to keep the mood light. He would help with the little tasks, delivering napkins to the customers with a smile, or even coming up with new taco ideas that made Mark laugh. But even Luke could sense the tension in the air, especially on those late nights when Mark would sit alone in the kitchen, his mind racing. One evening, as Mark was cleaning up after another busy day, he received a call that would change everything. It was from Tanya, and her voice was full of urgency. "Mark, I need to talk to you," she said, her tone serious. "There's been an issue. Some of the other food trucks in the area have started complaining about your location. They're saying it's affecting their business. The health department is getting involved, and there's a chance they might pull your permit if you don't make some changes." Mark's stomach dropped. His permit, his dream, it was all on the line. "Wait. What?" Mark said, his mind spinning. "Why? We've been following all the rules. I've been paying for all the necessary permits. What's going on?" Tanya sighed. "I don't know all the details, but I'm hearing that it's about the location. You're parked too close to some of the other trucks, and they say it's creating unfair competition. I don't know if they'll force you to move or not, but you need to address this soon." Mark felt a wave of frustration rise in his chest. This was the last thing he needed. Just when things were finally looking up, something like this came out of nowhere. "Thanks for letting me know, Tanya. I'll try to figure something out," he said, his voice tinged with both anger and worry. "Don't stress too much, Mark. I know you can handle it," Tanya reassured him. "But you need to act fast. If they decide to shut you down, it could take a while to get back up and running." Mark hung up the phone, his thoughts racing. What now? His dream felt like it was slipping through his fingers, and he couldn't afford to lose everything now. The next few days were filled with tension and uncertainty. Mark spent hours talking to the health department and trying to negotiate with the other food truck vendors. But it seemed like the situation was only getting more complicated. The competition was stiff, and the permit issue was becoming a real problem. Every solution Mark tried felt like a temporary fix. By Friday, he felt completely drained, physically, emotionally, and financially. It seemed like the world was conspiring against him. What if this was the end of the road for Luke's Taco dream? His stomach churned at the thought of telling Luke that they might have to close the truck down. But then something unexpected happened. It was a Friday evening, and Mark was standing behind the taco truck, trying to get everything in order for the night's rush. The usual crowd was gathered, enjoying tacos with their families, laughing and chatting with Luke, who was handing out free stickers with their logo. That's when Mark spotted someone standing at the edge of the crowd, a familiar face. It was Keanu Reeves. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Keanu Reeves? The actor. It took him a moment to register. The movie star was casually leaning against a tree, watching the scene unfold. Mark couldn't believe his eyes. He had seen Keanu in movies countless times, but never in a situation like this. Mark didn't know what to do. Was it really him? Why was he here? He felt out of place, like a fish out of water, trying to keep it together while his entire world felt like it was falling apart. And then, to Mark's surprise, Keanu walked up to him, a smile on his face. "Hey, are you the owner of this taco truck?" Keanu asked in his calm, friendly voice. Mark blinked, still stunned. Yeah, I am." "Wow, I can't believe you're here," Keanu chuckled. "I saw the truck and it caught my eye. I love tacos, and I'm all about supporting small businesses like yours." Mark smiled, still in disbelief. "Well, thank you. That means a lot. I've been hearing a lot of good things about you," Keanu continued, "and I want to help." Mark's eyes widened. "Help? How?" Keanu looked around, and Mark noticed the small crowd that had gathered around the truck. Some people were snapping pictures, while others were eagerly waiting in line for tacos. Keanu spoke quietly, but with conviction. "I know things have been tough for you," he said. "I've been following the struggles of small business owners in the area, and I've been hearing about what's been going on with the permits. It's a shame. I want to help you get the exposure you need. I'll make a social media post for you, tell my followers about Luke's taco dream and how they can support you. Let's make some noise for your business. Maybe we can get the word out and bring in more customers." Mark stood there stunned. "Wait, you're serious? You'd really do that?" Keanu smiled. "Absolutely. I've been in your shoes before, trying to make something work against the odds. If I can use my platform to help someone else, I'm all in." The next day, Keanu posted about Luke's taco dream on his Instagram, sharing a photo of himself enjoying a taco and giving a shout-out to Mark and Luke. The post went viral, and within hours, the truck was flooded with new customers. People from all over the city came to try the tacos and show their support. The lines stretched down the block. The attention brought not only more business, but also new opportunities. Several local media outlets contacted Mark, offering to feature his story. The overwhelming support from the community and the exposure from Keanu's post gave Mark the momentum he needed to fight the permit issues. Mark worked with a lawyer to secure his spot and appeal the permit issue, and with the outpouring of support from his customers, the local authorities agreed to let him stay in business. The storm was over. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but Luke's taco dream had weathered the worst of it. That night, as Mark closed up the truck, he looked down at Luke, who was already counting the tips and helping him organize the truck for the next. "Dad, do you think we're going to make it?" Luke asked, looking up with wide eyes. Mark knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I know we will, buddy. We've got a lot of people rooting for us now." Mark smiled, his heart full of gratitude. He hadn't just gained customers. He had gained a community, and with their support, there was no challenge they couldn't face together. As weeks passed, the storm that had nearly crushed Luke's taco dream faded into the background. Thanks to the overwhelming support they had received, not just from the community, but from Keanu Reeves himself, things began to settle into a steady rhythm. Mark's taco truck was now a local sensation, and the lines outside the truck stretched longer every day. With the issues regarding the permit behind him, Mark focused all his energy on improving the business. He hired a couple of part-time employees to help with the growing demand and began offering new specials on the menu, such as Taco Tuesdays and Family Feast Fridays, which drew in even more customers. The truck wasn't just a place to grab a bite. It had become a gathering spot, a place where people connected over delicious food and shared stories. It was everything Mark had hoped for when he first envisioned his taco dream. Luke, of course, was a big part of that success. His enthusiasm and creativity infused the business with a spark that kept it from becoming just another food truck. He was constantly coming up with new ideas, tacos with unexpected ingredients, limited-time salsas, even experimenting with desserts. One night, he proudly brought Mark a tray of churros he had perfected himself, and it became an instant hit. "I think we might just have the best churros in town, Dad," Luke grinned, handing over the tray. Mark took a bite and nodded, smiling at his son. "You're not wrong. We've definitely got something special here." One sunny afternoon, Mark was working behind the counter when a familiar face walked up to the truck again. It was Tanya, her usual cheerful demeanor a welcome sight. "I've been hearing a lot of buzz about you guys lately," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Seems like everything's really taking off." Mark wiped his hands on a towel, nodding. "It's been amazing. I can't believe how much we've grown in such a short time. Thanks to you, we got through that rough patch." Tanya smiled. "You did the hard work. I'm just happy to have been able to help." Mark took a deep breath, the reality of his success starting to hit him. "It's been a wild ride, Tanya, and I'm proud of it. But, you know what? There's one thing that's been on my mind." "What's that?" Tanya asked, leaning on the counter. Mark hesitated for a moment, his thoughts turning to the future. "I want to expand. I want to open another location, maybe a storefront, or even another taco truck. I want Luke to be a part of something that lasts. This is his future too. I just don't know how to make it happen." Tanya placed a hand on his shoulder. "I think you're ready for the next step. And don't worry, you're not alone in this. There are investors out there who believe in what you're doing. I'll help you find the right people, Mark. You've earned it." Mark felt a rush of gratitude. He had spent so long fighting to keep things afloat that he hadn't stopped to think about the possibilities for the future. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he could truly dream again. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about securing a future where he and Luke could thrive no matter what. Days turned into weeks, and with Tanya's help, Mark began exploring ways to expand. He met with local investors who were drawn to the story of a father and son overcoming adversity to build something incredible. The story of Luke's taco dream resonated with people on a deeper level, and before long, they were able to secure the funding they needed to open a second location. It was a moment of triumph for Mark, but it was also a reflection of how far they had come. When they finally opened the doors to the new store, it felt surreal. Mark stood in the middle of the bustling space, watching customers enjoying tacos at the tables, and he couldn't help but think back to the day when he had nothing but a taco truck and a dream. Now he had a thriving business, a dedicated team, and most importantly, a future for his son. One evening, as the sun set over the parking lot of their second location, Mark stood outside the truck, looking at the glowing lights. Luke was inside, preparing orders with the team, and Mark was filled with a sense of pride. They had made it. "You know, Luke," Mark called out, his voice full of emotion. "I've been thinking. A few months ago, I didn't even know how we'd make it through the week. But now look at us." Luke looked up from the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yeah, Dad, we really did it." Mark smiled, his heart full. He walked over to his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This is just the beginning, buddy. We've got a lot more tacos to serve and a lot more dreams to chase." Luke's face lit up with a grin. "And I'm with you every step of the way, Dad." They stood there for a moment, watching the people enjoying their tacos. It was a quiet moment of reflection for Mark. He had always believed in the power of hard work, but now he knew that it was the love for family, the unwavering support from those who believed in him, and the willingness to take risks that had made his dream a reality. Just as they were getting ready to close up for the night, Mark received another unexpected call. It was from Keanu Reeves again. "Mark!" Keanu's voice came through the phone, casual and friendly as always. "I just wanted to check in and see how you guys were doing." "We're doing great, Keanu," Mark said, a wide smile on his face. "You won't believe it, we've opened a second location." Keanu chuckled. "That's amazing. I'm proud of you, Mark, and you know, I've been thinking about how much potential this taco truck has. I have a few friends in the business, And I think I could help you guys get into some more markets. It's time to take this national. Mark felt the excitement stir in his chest again. National? This was a dream he never thought possible. You're serious? Mark asked, his voice filled with awe. Absolutely, Keanu replied. Let's talk more soon, okay? I want to see you guys reach the next level. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Mark knew one thing for sure. Luke's taco dream was no longer just a dream. It was a thriving reality, one built on hard work, dedication, and love. With Luke by his side, and now the support of people like Keanu, the possibilities seemed endless. For Mark, this journey had started with a simple wish, to build a better life for his son. And as he looked at the taco truck that had brought them so far, he realized that this was just the beginning.